Welcome to Dwellings, a podcast from the City of San Jose Housing Department, where we talk with thought leaders about ending homelessness, building affordable housing, and key housing policies. I'm Jeff Scott, and I'll be your host for Season 4 of Dwellings. On today's episode, I'm joined by Ruth Cueto, Supervising Planner in the City of San Jose Department of Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement. We will be discussing the concept of ministerial approvals, what they are, when they are used, and how this streamlined permit process for housing development is implemented in the City of San Jose. So Ruth, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. As you noted, I'm with the Planning, Building, Code Enforcement Department. I am a supervising planner and I oversee a team of planners. One of the planners on my team is responsible for processing permits for affordable housing developments in San Jose. And many of their projects are actually ministerial projects, which I think we'll get into. The other half of my team focuses on housing policy, so I am the housing team within planning.
So ministerial approval is a phrase that some people may not be familiar with. Can you tell us what that means?
With a ministerial process and review, there is no community meeting required. There is no public hearing. We cannot have a public hearing where you can go and voice your concerns, and either the council or the director or the decision maker can weigh the community's responses or feedback as part of their approval or disapproval of a project. And ministerial also many times it means it's streamlined. We have timelines for review that are much shorter. And they also don't have to do what we call CEQA review or environmental review. So there's no environmental impact report or initial study. From point A to point B, it's very clear for the developer what they're getting themselves into.
So has ministerial approval in California or in the city of San Jose been around for a long time, or is this a fairly new development?
I would say somewhat new. The law that I think is usually sort of describes the ministerial process. It's SB 35, Senate Bill 35, authored by, I think it was Senator Scott Wiener, approved by the governor in 2018. That's the one that most people think of when we talk about ministerial review. There are a few other laws that are in place that also allow for ministerial review, but that came into play in 2018, and at the end of 2018 was when the city of San Jose received its first application under that state law. So our first approvals didn't happen until 2020. But since then, we've gotten lots of interest from affordable housing developers to use that process.
What was the driving force behind the growth of ministerial approval? What was the need that it was addressing?
So the legislature, and you sort of can see this in the hearings and in the state law itself, has made it a point that affordable housing and housing in general is the production and the construction of housing is of utmost importance to the state of California, whether we're looking at it economically, socially. It's a quality of life issue. And what the legislature has experienced is that in their opinion, too many cities have created obstacles for the approval and construction of housing, and specifically affordable housing. So I think, they were hearing from developers, from advocates of housing, of affordable housing, that the process was just too difficult and onerous for many developers all throughout California. I'd like to think that wasn't the case in San Jose, and actually I don't think it was, because we have a really good reputation of building affordable housing here, at least through the 80s and 90s, with redevelopment and the housing department support. But it was too onerous. You had projects that were going through the process, let's say midstream, and then the city can come back and say, well, we actually want you to consider this design change because the community's pushing back on this. Or, there was just more negotiation, I think, and a lot of pushback. And what this law did was that not only did it provide for that, there's a timeline, we have to let these developers know whether they're approved or not. But a very important piece of it is that we can only hold projects to objective development standards. And objective means we can't use something like, this design doesn't fit into the character of the neighborhood. that's subjective, right? Character can mean one thing to me, one thing to you, one thing to the developer. So it's not measurable and it's not objective. And so that state law actually, it very much allows that sort of that is the driving force when we're reviewing projects, is that we can only hold it to objective standards. And these standards also have to be easily accessible and viewable by the developer. We can't pull this obscure, policy that was in place 30 years ago that no one knows about at the last minute and then tell a developer, well, you're not building it to this standard, so we're not going to approve it, or you have to resubmit. So I think that was I think the gist and sort of why the legislature pushed this. It was a housing crisis. It's that it's getting difficult. It was becoming difficult for people to build, and cities were getting in the way. And so that's what it's trying to accomplish, is just really streamline this process.
And is ministerial approval focused only on housing, or is it all types of development? And if it's housing, is it all types of housing, or is it only affordable housing?
It's only housing, residential uses. It could be a mixed use project, but the purpose is for residential. And SB 35 actually allows for a mix of affordabilities. SB 35, depending on the city, would apply to a project that is at least 50% deed restricted affordable. So it could have 50% market rate, 50% affordable. However, in San Jose, I think we've only seen 100% affordable projects take advantage of this state law.
Just for our audience out there, when we say affordable housing, what we're talking about, you just use the phrase deed restricted. We're talking about housing that by law has to have limits on how high the rent can be, and also limits on how high the income can be for the people who occupy that housing. So can you tell us, Ruth, how has the city of San Jose implemented SB 35 or ministerial approval in general? Can you walk us through what it might look like if I'm a developer with an affordable housing project and I come to you, what that approval process is going to look like?
Sure. So I'd like to say, though, that, in San Jose, even before this bill, we didn't treat an affordable project any different from a market rate or mixed income project. So again, going back to our history here and our willingness to build and support affordable housing in San Jose. So you would come in with your application. We have specific applications for SB 35, and there's another state law, AB 2162, that also provides a streamlined review. It calls out all the requirements. So with SB 35, there are some restrictions in terms of the sites that can use it. It has to have a specific zoning and general plan. So the review is very similar to any other, market rate project that's not using ministerial review. The main difference is that we don't require CEQA or environmental review. So that cost and that application is not required for someone who's using SB 35. There is no community meeting required, unlike our other projects. And there's also no public hearing. So I think most residential projects in San Jose end up going to a director's hearing. So the director of our department makes the final determination on a project. Those are on Wednesday mornings. But in this case, that's not how they would be approved. Staff does their review, determines consistency with the objective standards I described. And once we deem it consistent and it's really just checked all these boxes, we start working on a draft permit, and our director reviews it, makes sure our analysis is correct, and signs the permit, and that's it. So very straightforward.
So in a ministerial approval, where a lot of those public meetings don't take place and subjective review doesn't have to take place, would the neighbors have an opportunity to voice their concern? Is there any step in the process that allows them to come forward and express reservations or concerns with the design of the development?
Yes, so all projects, including ministerial projects, are required to post what we call our on-site notice. And these are notices, these are sort of 4 by 3 foot, notices that describe the permit they're requesting, and it has contact information for the project planner. so that the neighbors can contact us or residents can contact us with questions or their concerns. That is pretty much the extent of the outreach, if you want to call it that, but that is a way for the community to know what's going on and that there is a proposal there. We always get these kinds of emails from neighbors, even if it is ministerial. So we do our best to respond and provide information on the limitations of what we can and can't do with their concerns or their questions. And I would say too that actually maybe 99% of the projects we've seen under ministerial review, the developer still goes ahead and has a community meeting on their own. They, get notices, they coordinate, they host them virtual or in person. So from my experience, they are willing to listen and sometimes even modify the design if there's, some questions or issues and take that feedback. But there's still that opportunity to communicate with us. And we also have for residents who are just interested in general and development in San Jose, we have a website, SJ as in San Jose, sjpermits.org. And you can sign up to get notification, I think a few times a week or once a week on any and all applications in your council district or throughout the city. So you can be made aware of what's been filed.
In your experience, have you seen a reduction of X% of time it takes to approve a process or X number of months or anything like that you can share with our audience that kind of quantifies the time savings or red tape savings?
Yeah, so a few years ago, a few years ago, we did this analysis. So I'm not sure if it still stands, but we did find that the ministerial projects were approved 2 months sooner than just a regular discretionary project. So there was some time savings there. I would say too that, and I think the other sort of saving for the developer in this case is that they wouldn't be subject to any CEQA lawsuits. And sometimes that's what can, further delay a project even after approval, is if someone files a lawsuit against the developer or the city for approval of a project and they're using CEQA, the Environmental Quality Act law, to stall the project.
I see. And I would imagine in addition to maybe avoiding CEQA related lawsuits, environmental impact reports are probably fairly expensive, correct? Is that true?
Yes, they are. And that's another added cost is that additional analysis for the project.
Can you give us a sense of the general response that your department has received from developers since you started utilizing ministerial review? I would assume they like it, but I don't know.
Yeah. I think in the beginning, it took a brave developer to file the first application. Some conversations with developers were, they felt they weren't ready to submit these because they felt it was an affront to the city. They wanted to be collaborative, and they felt like this law may engender like some kind of animosity between the city and a developer because they're not going through our normal process. But we were very quick to dispel that. This is a state law. We have to follow it. We don't want to get sued like other cities. The governor made this the law, and so we're very mindful of that. But I think after the first few came through the door, there was just more openness and willingness for the affordable housing developers, because that's who's using the state law, is to use it pretty frequently. Like I said, I think about 90% or more of affordable housing entitlements since these bills came into play have used the streamlined process. Very few of them go through our typical discretionary process.
Do you ever see projects where a developer starts down a more traditional kind of discretionary process and perhaps gets frustrated or sees some issues bubbling up, so they decide to kind of switch in midstream and go through the ministerial process instead?
I believe we did have one project that did that. Maybe there's only one I can remember, and it was early on in 2020, 2019 that did get frustrated with the discretionary process. And I think it had to do with some of our subjective design standards related to historic resources or adjacent, it's near a historic district or something like that. But pretty much most folks, I think, come in ready to do this.
What do you think about the ministerial process? How does it affect your work and your approach to your work?
I have to say I think it was difficult to sort of learn the process in the beginning. One, it was, like I said, it was adopted and went into effect late 2018, and we received our first application right before the holiday break, which isn't helpful because we go on vacation and, there's timelines for when we have to respond to them. And so it was definitely enhanced our skills in reading state laws, which are not always very clear, and there's a lot of room for interpretation. However, in this case, the HCD did provide guidelines for cities to interpret the law. But the big sort of difference is that, the objective versus subjective standards. And when you look at, for example, our general plan, and we rely on our general plan, that's like our first place to go when we're evaluating a project. We have, ambitious goals, and we want to see this great, community come together. But that was drafted in 2011, and fast forward to 2018, 2019, where it says everything has to be measurable. You can't say things like, your project should enhance the pedestrian quality. Your project should, all these shoulds, that's out the door. And so, whereas before ministerial review, we can always point to those policies and say, this is what we want. It says should, but we want, we interpreted as shall, and we feel very strongly about certain qualities of projects. We no longer had the ability to rest on that. And it had to be very specifically language that says you must or you shall. And so going from having more discretion as a planner to push for changes, to negotiate, that was difficult, I think, because we also realized, a lot of our standards were written very subjectively, and I can understand where a developer can get frustrated, right? Because they're like, well, it says I could, I don't have to. And here comes this planner who cares about the width of the sidewalk, and they're going to fight with me, and it's going to, so I get it to that point. But for us, I feel like it was that just losing that control really over what we can and can't approve and how we approve it. And I would say too that with ministerial review, actually SB 35, the law was written in a way that it says that a site can qualify if either the general plan allows for housing or the zoning district. And in San Jose, we're cleaning this up, but for a long time, our general plan and the zoning did not align. So we had sites that said, commercial, neighborhood community commercial, and the zoning was, for example, multifamily. Well, a developer doesn't usually look at the general plan, they look at the zoning. And so they come in and say, I want to build housing. And the planners say, no, it's only commercial. So we ended up with a few sites like that where we felt very strongly that the general plan should prevail. And if it doesn't allow for housing, it doesn't allow for housing. But this law sort of allowed the ability for a few projects to move forward where we didn't feel it didn't align with our view and our vision for the city. So just, the loss of local control, the loss of sort of, having a say in some of these projects, that was probably the more difficult part for our planners. But I would say too that it's definitely opened our eyes to how difficult, especially affordable projects can be, to get their entitlements and their permits when they don't have this process, when they don't have this way of sort of getting to the end of the line and not have to do community meeting after community meeting after, and everyone sort of whittling down. And I've been to a few community meetings recently, and they were actually ministerial projects, but again, the developer was willing to go out there. And I hadn't been in a while, and going back in those spaces of, very angry and frustrated residents and feeling like they had, they were completely against it. It just reminded me of, why these laws are important, because if they didn't, it's very likely these projects would not be approved. There could be a lot of pushback, and it could just be, whittled away, and it would end up with a permit that doesn't really serve the purpose of the project.
And so, Ruth, as you talk to colleagues around the Bay Area, around the state, other planners in other cities, have their experiences been similar to you? The way they've tried to implement the law been similar to San Jose, or is San Jose unique in any way?
No, I think we've all sort of experienced this very similarly. I've talked to many jurisdictions, many cities, especially in the beginning when we were trying to figure out a process, put together an application, checklists. We were all sort of learning at the same time and came upon the same sort of obstacles. And I think even, a few cities have reached out and they're like, expressing their reservations and like, but isn't there a way we can say no? And it's like, no, there's no, this is the point of this law, is that you are bound to do X, Y, Z. So I know for some people, it seemed like a very hard pill to swallow, and they just could not believe that, no, that can't be right. Like, we can't say no, we can't request this or that. And it's like, nope, that's the way it is. And I think some cities tried to fight that process and tried to come up with obstacles, honestly. And the legislature, I think every year, if not almost every year since the adoption of that law, the legislature has had to add more like clarifying language, like you cannot do this post this project, or you cannot do that. And we wouldn't do it, right? Like, we just assume, okay, that's the way it is. But I think some cities were trying to come up with creative ways to modify the process, but it's not working.
Do you ever find developers who are willing to talk to you at the outset, at the very beginning of a project, before they get too far down the path, and sit down with you as a planner and discuss the project and take feedback from you early on, knowing that you can't necessarily just say no to them, but kind of gently try to direct them? Are they open to that kind of input?
Yeah, I think most are. In San Jose, we have a preliminary review application process where it's not a development permit. It's more of, hey, I have a site, I think I want to do this, what can you tell me, San Jose? And we go through our general plan, zoning, all our policies, and kind of give them a heads up. You should be aware you're near a creek, or these are the standards that will apply to your project. And that's, I think, a good opportunity to sort of lay the foundation of, this is our vision for the area. We would appreciate, if you can do X, Y, Z. So, and I should say too that, our team, we also take, one of the planners on my team, her role is to facilitate affordable housing. And part of that is taking phone calls from developers or applicants and talking, maybe 30 minutes about a specific site, whether it's very sort of, what is the zoning, what is the general plan, can I build housing? And then all the way to, will the city support? We can't say the city will support, we have to do your analysis, but having those conversations early on, it does happen. That's what my team does and what we're here to do for the development community.
And now that this law has been in effect for a few years, have you seen any unintended consequences that maybe when the law was first established, the legislature didn't foresee, or has it been fairly smooth since the initial rollout?
I mean, I would go back to what I said earlier about San Jose and our unique situation where the general plan and the zoning don't align. And I think we would have appreciated a modification to that language where it would say, the general plan allows for housing, because that is the blueprint for a city. It's not the zoning, in our opinion. That's what sort of that guides everything else. That's where you start. So in our case, we end up with housing on sites that we didn't envision or that we felt were not appropriate for that, for those developments. But other than that, I don't think so. I mean, it's, at least in San Jose, it's accomplishing, I think, what it's intended to do. We have many projects that have been approved, and a few thousand units approved under SB 35 and other ministerial review.
I'm sorry, can you share that number again? How many units of housing have been approved under this?
2,000 units, over 2,000 units under SB 35.
Wow, that's great. And you said you got your first application in 2020. So
yeah, approved in 2020. Yeah.
Approved. Okay.
Yeah.
So in 2.5 years, you've gotten over 2,000 units approved through this process. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
You and the team must have been very busy.
Yes, very busy. Yes, it's been and it's cyclical, but we're back in the busy season as well. So my planner's working on many projects, and we also have other folks within planning that have taken on a ministerial review. But yeah.
Well, Ruth, I know I've found this very enlightening, very educational. Is there anything else that any big issues or topics related to ministerial approval that I have failed to ask you about that you'd like to share or mention?
We've been doing this for a few years. Projects are being built, so we're not just issuing permits. Our first SB 35 project, I think, celebrated their grand opening late last year or like the fall of last year. So it's exciting to see the very first one that came through the door. It was actually the first one that was constructed. And, I was on the site. I'm familiar with the site. So I remember it was a strip mall, and now it's like the 7-story affordable housing multifamily project. It looks really, really great. But I would say that if folks have more, they're interested in learning more about this, they can always visit our website. We do have a webpage dedicated to ministerial reviews and the process and how staff evaluates it, and any questions, who they can contact. There's also sjpermits.org where they can look up permit applications within their council district or throughout the city, just to be informed on what's going on.
Thanks so much, Ruth, for joining me on today's episode. Thanks for listening to Dwellings, the City of San Jose Housing Department podcast. Our theme music is Speed City, composed and performed by Attain Charles. Thanks to San Jose Jazz for letting us use their music. If you like the show, please subscribe and share with your friends and family. If you're looking for more ways to help address housing and homelessness issues in San Jose, please check out the show notes. You can follow the Housing Department on social media. We're on Twitter and Facebook at SJ City Housing. And if you have questions or comments about today's episode, please send them to housingcoms@sanjoseca.gov. The artwork on our website was created by Chelsea Palacio. Dwellings is produced by me, Jeff Scott, and Jose Chavez of the Housing Department.